I believe I was put on this planet to help people learn how to connect with each other and lead more meaningful lives by connecting with each other. And I didn't realize that until I fortuitously landed at Stanford Business School and was given an opportunity to teach this class. It is my life's work, and I believe with every cell of my body, and we could close here, that if we had a critical mass of human beings on this planet equipped with these skills and competencies, we wouldn't just have better organizations and more functional teams. We'd have stronger families. We'd have stronger communities. We'd have more robust nonprofits. And by the way, sometimes when I dream big, maybe more functional governments.
Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Carole, you've written an amazing book, Connect, which I highly recommend. And today we're going to talk about the ideas in your book around how to build exceptional relationships. But before we get started, let's say that someone finds this podcast on the internet, and all they know is that we will be talking about building exceptional relationships. They know nothing more. Can you tell them the reason why they should stay around and listen? What will they get from this conversation?
What a great question. So let's start with the book. The book is based on a very famous course that was taught at the Stanford Business School. It's not a business book, but it's very business relevant. So if you're interested in why would this matter in a business context, people do business with people. They don't do business with ideas or machines or products or strategies or even money. They do business with people. So you might, and unless you get the people part right, your success professionally is going to be limited until you understand how to build stronger, more robust relationships. Maybe not exceptional, and we can get into that, but at least robust and functional. Now, if you find yourself in your life in relationships that feel lacking in some way, your marriage isn't quite what you had hoped. Your relationship with your kids your grown kids isn't what you would like. Your relationship with your parents is dysfunctional. Your relationship with your sibling is not quite what you want. I mean, human beings are social animals. And so learning to develop strong, robust relationships, and we'll get to exceptional in a minute, but at least strong and robust, automatically means you're going to have a richer, more fulfilling life. Now, at the Stanford Business School, where the course originated and where the book comes from, 40 years of teaching this, and by the way, I didn't invent it. I'm old, but not that old. I taught it for a long time. But 40 years of teaching it has shown us that being interpersonally competent, having the ability to create strong relationships, is a determinant of not only professional success, but personal success. So if any of that resonates for you, you might want to stick around.
Perfect. And Carole, you mentioned already a couple of times that we've got relationships which are, you said, at the very least, they need to be strong and robust and functional. And then you said, even before we get to exceptional. Tell me more. What's the difference there?
So if you think about it, relationships exist on a continuum. At one end of the continuum is what I call contact and no connection. Those are your 10,000 Facebook friends. Sorry, Facebook, but those are not friends, okay? Contact and no connection, or dysfunction. At the other end of the continuum is what my co-author and I came to call exceptional, which is what many of our students experienced. And now my participants in my Leaders in Tech startup that I started up after I left Stanford. We can talk about that later. But anyway, so that's the continuum. Along the way, if you develop the competencies and skills you need to get to exceptional, you already get to robust and functional. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all you need. At work, especially, a lot of dysfunctional relationships, just getting them to robust would be a game changer. And also getting them to robust so that it's less transactional. I mean, there's always going to be transaction, but it's it's not just transactional. And it's also less, if we think about what's happened since the pandemic and everybody's gone to Zoom, or like, there's lots of other options, but everybody's gone online to communicate, many meetings. Lots of people have never met. They work for virtual companies, and all their relationships are virtual. In a virtual environment, task gets foregrounded and relationship gets backgrounded. And if you think about pre-pandemic and pre-virtual days, that was not always the case. There was people knew each other a little bit more. Hey, you were gathering for the meeting, and before the meeting started, you said, "So what happened with Joey's baseball game?" Or you guys would say football game, last weekend. And then, I know that you've got a son and his name is Joey and he's really into football. And we have more than just task. But, we get online, we have a meeting scheduled, it's for 60 minutes. There's no time for niceties. And what's more, it's exhausting to be online. There's a lot of research that shows it's more, it tires you more. And so then nobody's going to make the extra time for connecting. So yeah, I think now, once you've gotten to robust and functional, getting to exceptional takes work. Well, it all takes work. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes commitment, it takes even more to get to exceptional. In fact, David, my co-author, and I talk about the metaphor we use is, think about climbing a mountain. He was a mountain climber, and starting at the foothills with somebody and getting to an upper meadow. That's robust and functional. It's a lovely meadow. It's beautiful. You're tired already, and you sit and you have a picnic, you have a glass of wine, you chat, and maybe that's enough. But there's a peak. And the meadow's already beautiful. It's got some nice views. It's got some pretty flowers, but there's a peak and it's magnificent up there. With a few people, maybe you make the climb to the top. So that the metaphor works as a way of explaining what
By
it's
the way,
about.
Carole, I love metaphors and analogies. So
Me
if you've got
too.
a few others, feel free to include them in this chat.
Me too.
And
Yeah.
going back to what you said about online versus in-person
Yes.
dynamics, would you then say, do you think that it's harder today in an online environment to build either strong or robust or even exceptional relationships?
I won't use the word harder because language creates reality. I will use the word takes more effort. If you consider more effort harder, then yes. But the basic principles of that there are 6 characteristics to relationships as they move down this continuum. And there are skills attached to developing relationships that have those characteristics. And so, they include, I feel more known by you and you feel more known by me. We don't have to spin our image. And the only thing about me that I allow you to know is smoke and mirrors. So so we use the term appropriate authenticity, because I'm not saying bleh, I'm going to share everything in the world with you. And first of all, that's terrifying to think about doing, and also would overwhelm you. But most people err on the side of not allowing themselves to be very known. And think about do you have somebody in your life who you feel known by? That's a pretty cool feeling. It's like, wow, somebody I can relax with. I don't have to pretend. I can admit that I don't know. I can admit that I'm insecure. Uh, and likewise, I can say I'm really proud of that and not feel worried that they're going to judge me and think I'm being, pretentious. There's something just profoundly meaningful about having somebody in your life that you feel known by. And likewise, engaging. So the main skill, if you will, there is a willingness to be vulnerable and to disclose. And in fact, let me pause there for a moment. That skill also means knowing how much to disclose, when, and it means understanding that disclosure is a phenomenon that's best if we do it gradually. So we have this thing called the 15% rule. In the 3 concentric circles, in the middle is what you would say to anybody who would never think twice about it. That's not how we build great relationships. The outer circle is your danger zone. So that's the comfort zone. Outer circle is the danger zone. And, never in a million years would I consider sharing that with you. But there is this circle in the middle called the learning zone, or the zone of ambiguity, cleverly. But it's also the zone, it's where we learn. We cannot learn something new if we stay in our comfort zone. Think about if you're a skier, if you've ever gone skiing, they don't leave you on the bunny slope, but they don't start you on the double black diamond slope. So once you've mastered the bunny slope, then you go, to the little green circle slope. And that's the equivalent of being 15% outside your comfort zone. Because we used to say, just step outside your comfort zone into your learning zone. And my students used to say, but Carole, the minute I step outside my comfort zone, how do I know I'm not in my danger zone? So we used to say 15%, little bit. You'll feel it. You'll feel it in your palms or in the back of your neck, You can tell, your body will tell you, I'm a little outside of my comfort zone, but not way out. And then you're much less likely to freak yourself out or the other person out. And by the way, the other thing about disclosure is that it tends to be reciprocal. The more willing I am to let you know me, the more likely it is that you will be willing to let me know you. So if we're going to know each other better, one of us has to start. And by the way, if there's a power differential in the relationship, as there is in business often, a boss and a direct report, there's an inherent power differential, or a VP and a salesperson, and it doesn't matter if they report to each other. It is incumbent on the higher power position person to start, because the lower power position person already feels vulnerable. So asking them to be even more vulnerable by asking them to disclose first is not very fair. So that's something you might want to think about if you find yourself in your life in situations. By the way, if you're the parent and you've got a, teenager, there's a power differential there. So the first set of skills all have to do with how do I allow myself to be better known by you, and how do I make it easier for you to be better known by me, which also include being curious and inquiring and being curious, inquiring, and then listening, as opposed to only listening for what you wanted to hear. So those are the first set of skills in building these competencies and moving down the continuum. And the second set of skills have to do with being honest with each other, trusting that disclosures won't be used against you, and being invested in each other's growth. And that's why, we often used to say, sometimes you have to care enough about somebody else to tell them the very worst. If you're doing something that is really hurting us in our relationship, and I don't say anything, I'm colluding. I'm saying it's okay for you to keep doing it. And I don't care very much about you or the relationship, do I? And by the way, if you're doing it with me, you might be doing it with somebody else. And maybe you don't care that it's costing you with me, but it may be costing you with somebody you do care about. And then if I care about you, why would I not tell you? So that's a whole other set of skills, because most people, we can use the broad term feedback, but I almost hate to use that term because a lot of people, there's a lot of training courses about feedback. There's a lot of books written about feedback. Most of it is, in my humble opinion, weak. And that's because it does not really address some of the most important elements of giving effective feedback so that the other person can hear it, including speaking to their interests.
And by the way, Carole, I'd love to explore these in a little bit more detail.
Yes.
Two topics that you brought up already. One is vulnerability, the other one is feedback.
Yeah.
Before we get there, though, I just want to make sure that for those who haven't read the book, you mentioned that there are 6 characteristics of
Yes.
exceptional
Relationships.
relationships. At a very high level, can we just summarize them for those who haven't
Sure.
read the book?
Sure. The first one is I am better known by you. The second one is you are better known by me. Well, actually, vice versa. First, you know me better. Second, I know you better. Third, we trust each other. We trust we will not, we, our disclosures to each other won't be used against us. Fourth, we can be honest with each other. Fifth, we know how to have productive conflict. Sixth, we're invested in each other's learning and growth.
By the way, conflict is also something I like to discuss with you, and we'll get there. Before we do,
Yeah.
though, if it's okay for you, now you mentioned your co-author David,
Yes.
and I understand, if please correct me if I'm wrong, that in your relationship with your co-author, you at some point you were at the brink of a collapse of
Oh,
the
yes. Oh,
relationship.
yes. In fact, I think in the first or second chapter of the book,
Okay, so would
it's
you?
it doesn't doesn't spoil the ending, but it is a preview.
Yeah. I also understand that you were able to recover the relationship. Would you, if you are
That's right.
open to that, would you be open to sharing what happened there in the context of
Sure,
what we?
sure. Well, for starters, David did some things, and what he did is actually less important than how they made me feel. Okay, so by the way, the students at the school call the course Touchy Feely. The course is called Interpersonal Dynamics, but they call it Touchy Feely. And the reason they call it that is that there's a big emphasis on the importance of feelings. So emphasis on the feelings, not the touchy. The importance of feelings in building relationships, because emotions are universal. So he did some stuff that first of all, I was furious by. I mean, I was furious. I felt unsupported and really disappointed and furious. When I thought I could count on him, that it turned out I couldn't count on him. Now, notice anger turns out to be a secondary emotion. Most of the time, underneath anger is a much more vulnerable emotion. Underneath anger is sadness, disappointment, hurt, or fear. Those tend to be the more basic fundamental emotions, but we've been socialized not to express those because it makes us feel too vulnerable. If I say I'm hurt, you're going to think I'm weak. If I say I'm scared, you're going to think I'm weak. So, especially in business, especially as a woman. But actually, I think men have been socialized with an even stronger message around, get into those yucky feelings. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be mad. That's manly, as long as you express it correctly. So, so I was furious, but really I was incredibly disappointed, devastated actually by, it would have never have occurred to me that he would do or not do what I had wanted him to do. And I said I would never talk to him again. So David was my mentor. I've had like 6 different careers. I'm not a career academic, but When I got to Stanford and, David, brought me onto the faculty, I sort of found my second home, and it's the career that lasted the longest. I was there for almost 20 years. Uh, and he was my mentor. He was like an incredibly close friend. And I just could not believe what he had done. And I said, I'm not, that's it. I'm never talking to him again. Now, my kids and my husband, people around me, have all learned these tools, by the way. We can get into that and how cool it is to have little kids that know these tools. But one of my kids actually said to me, "Really, Mom? You're going to write off this one of the most important relationships of your entire life? How can you teach what you teach and do that? How can you stand by your life's work and do that?" And I was like, well, because you know what? You have to want to repair. I do believe in the power of repair, but you have to want to. And I don't want to. I'm not willing to invest in the repair because it's, I'm just too mad. And then I realized, well, no, I'm actually just too hurt. And then over time, David never gave up. David, was respectful of the fact that I had taken this stand. But, we were both colleagues. We were both on the faculty. We were in meetings together. We saw each other. And it got to, initially, I would not arrive at the meeting until exactly when it was going to start, so I wouldn't have to interact with him. And I would leave the minute the last word was said. So I mean, that was ridiculous. But I was like, that's it. But, there was something about how clear it was to me that he was not going to give up. He was just, and also that he respected my boundaries. He didn't push, but he made it very clear that he was there anytime, anywhere, under any circumstance that I wanted to engage in any repair conversation. He was, and so actually it was a colleague of ours who had also been part of this whole scenario, who but not quite as bad, who I repaired with first. And then he said, if you can repair with me, don't you think you want to try to repair with David? So then finally we found our way back. It was long and arduous, and we used everything we teach, everything that's in the book. And we were both well served by the fact that we both knew it so well. And we could both talk to each other in ways that we could cut through all the garbage and get to the real stuff. And the bottom line was, I had never felt emotionally met by him. I had heard him justify why he had done what he'd done. I'd heard him explain why he had done what he'd done. I'd heard him say he was sorry, sort of, that it had impacted me that way, but I'd never heard him acknowledge how that was for me emotionally. And the day he was able to do that was the day we began to repair. And we have a whole chapter in the book about meeting people emotionally. And in fact, one of the last chapters in the book is the story of our repair.
And you are making me think about me and my wife. I think I often fail at
Yes.
meeting
Yes.
emotionally, which is so
You know what? That is, not to overgeneralize, but men tend to do that much more than women. They're wired a little differently. They've certainly been socialized differently. I'll give you a kind of a cute, fun example of how my husband learned to do this. I would come home, I'd be really furious about something or upset about something or sad about something. And he would say, well, why don't you try doing this? Or what about that? And then I'd be like, ah. So then I had him, He'd read more about this. We talked more about this. So he developed what he called his little multiple choice test. So I would come home and he would say, okay, would this be one of those times where you just want me to agree with you that they're a bunch of assholes? Or you want me to say, God, that sounds awful. It really sounds like, I mean, that sucks. And I'm sorry that you're going through that. Or you want me to give you my thoughts about some of the things you might do. It was so great, Andrea, because I could just say, oh yeah, number two. And then he knew exactly how I needed him to behave. And it was like, cut to the chase. And then sometimes I'd say, well, I want two first, then I want one, and then we can get to three. And
My
that's
my challenge is that my default is I get to three immediately, or all the
exactly,
time, all the time.
exactly.
Anyway,
And you know why? There's a really good and lovely reason for that, which is that men connect around doing. And so often, and to the extent, and they could certainly connect around solving problems. And so to the extent that that's what you can offer up when your partner is upset, that's of course what you want to lead with. But that does not necessarily mean that's what she needs or wants.
yeah, and I see that all the time. And also,
Yeah.
you mentioned kids. That also resonates with me because I'm a father since 2 years. And so you said that we can also talk about how powerful it is when kids get to learn these
Yes.
tools. Tell me a little bit more.
So I'm going to share a little story with you. So this story I think is in the book. My son is maybe, they're probably 3 and 5. My older one is 5 and my younger one is 3. And they're playing. I hear them in the family room. I'm in the kitchen, but I hear them. They're playing. And my younger child says to my son, you know, that you keep picking the game, and I don't like that. So I get to choose the next game. And he says, yeah. Sure. And then they finish whatever they're playing. And he says, okay, now we're going to play dominoes. And she says, no, I said, I pick the next game. Unless I pick the next game, I'm not playing. And he says, well, and she says, I want to play Candyland. He says, well, I don't want to play Candyland. She says, well, I'll be in my room. When you're ready to let me choose the game, come get me. And she goes off to her room. He comes in the kitchen. He's like, Mommy, she won't play with me. I said, I'm sorry, honey. That's not what I heard. What I heard was she said she wants to take turns choosing the game. So you have a choice. So now he goes down the hall. Okay, we can play Candyland, but can we play dominoes next time? She said, sure. And then they traded. So let's think for a moment about what happened in that exchange. When she said, you keep choosing the game and I don't like that, she gave him some very clean feedback. It was behaviorally specific. This is what you're doing, and this is how it makes me feel. Right? And my intent, this is why I'm telling you, and unless I choose the game, I'm not going to continue to play. We call that clean. But you know what we do as adults? We make attributions, we impute motives, we label. So kids are actually pretty naturally good at this. So then when they get older, then they learn to say, you're just being a bully. Just because you're the older kid doesn't mean you get to choose. Let's keep it clean. And so at the core, one of the core models of Touchy Feely is called the model of the net, or the 3 realities. And essentially, it's what happened in this exchange with my kids, which is when somebody is doing something that isn't working for you. So there's 3 realities. The first reality is what's happening for me and what I do. The first reality is what's happening for me, what I'm thinking, what my intent is, how I see the world. Second reality is what I do. The third reality is how what I did impacts you. Now, at any exchange between 2 people, The reality in the middle is the only reality we share until we tell each other. If I do something, you don't know why I did it unless I tell you. And if you have a reaction, I don't know you had that reaction unless you tell me. So I mean, it sounds a little complicated and there's a picture that goes with it, but it's actually pretty simple. 3 realities: my reality, your reality, and the reality we share, which is behavior. It's the only one we have in common. So the problem we get into most of the time, and is that instead of saying, when you do X, I feel Y, and I'm telling you this because, we say, let's say you've interrupted me 3 times in the meeting that we're in, and we leave the meeting and I'm really ticked off, and I come to you and I say, you know what? I'm tired of you just trying to dominate. I don't know if that's what the minute and you're like, what are you talking about? I wasn't dominating. But if I say, in that meeting, you interrupted me 3 times when I started to say X, when I started to say Y, when I started to say Z. And when you do that, I feel dismissed, or I feel resentful, or I feel, and by the way, that's why in the appendix of the book, there is a vocabulary of feelings. And by the way, I always knew which students were taking Touchy Feely because they had a laminated copy of the vocabulary of feelings that they would walk around with. And now all my leaders in tech executives have laminated copies of the vocabulary of feelings. They've got them on conference room tables. They've got them tacked up on bulletin boards because, again, we haven't been socialized. Most people are like, I don't even know what I'm feeling beyond mad, sad, scared, glad. Okay, but there's like a lot of feelings beyond those. And so that's a really, really fundamental aspect of creating a relationship where you can be honest with each other. Remember, that was one of the characteristics. Where you can be invested in each other's growth, because I'm telling you this not to make you feel bad or lord it over you, but because I'm invested in you. And it's a way to make sure conflict remains productive.
Before we continue with this episode, I just want to share a few resources that I think will be super useful for you. The first one is check out either my book, Confident Presenter, or my colleague Phil Wakenall's book, Business Presentation Revolution, or both. These are books for business owners and leaders who want to take their presentation skills to a higher level. To make the most of the books, take the Confident Presenter Scorecard, which is an online tool that allows you to assess your presentation skills for free in less than 3 minutes. And then also, at the moment, I'm running a series of free presentation skills web classes, and I'd love to see you there. The links are in the show notes. Now, let's go back to the episode. I guess one of the things which is connected to what you've just said is something I heard you say in Lenny's podcast recently. I watched the interview. If I remember well, Carole, I think you said something along the lines of advice hinders relationships or something like that. Do I remember well?
Yeah. So I don't remember.
It was connected to feedback.
I mean, I do know the point, which is usually when I'm talking about inquiry and how important inquiry is to building relationships and asking open-ended questions so that the other person allows themselves to be better known and lets you know a little bit more about what's going on for them. The minute you give somebody advice, you cut that off. It increases power differentials. Advice increases a power differential. It minimizes the other person. And by the way, often when we give advice, it's not like the other person's never thought of that. So get over yourself if you think that your advice is going to be like so game changing. So it does. It hinders creating stronger, more robust relationships. And even when somebody asks you for advice, hey, I don't know what to do. What a trap. Because boy, don't we want to be the expert who can tell them what to do, as opposed to, well, I've got some ideas, but I suspect you've already thought about some of these. Do you want to first talk about what you've already thought about? How do you see the situation? What are the options? What's making you so upset about this? You know, pretty powerful to turn it into inquiry. And now you're actually honoring the other person and their experience.
All of these things, Carol, and by the way, I'm thinking about someone I know
Yes.
that for him the default is advice, advice, advice first. But I understand all of these things. I see how powerful they are. But again, to me, they are very personally very difficult to implement I'm not saying to implement, but again, my natural tendency often is to do the opposite, to do the wrong thing for
Yeah, well,
relationships.
you're not alone. By the way, there's a reason we've sold 130,000 books, and there's a reason that's the most popular course at the Stanford Business School. Um, it is not unusual for first of all, we've been socialized to do what you've just said, rather than what I'm talking about. Unless you were raised by me. By the way, my kids don't do that. And my husband's learned not to do that. And by the way, my kids have been enormously successful as a result of having learned to do this. So that's as an aside. But you have to learn it somewhere. And I remember when my son started kindergarten, he came home and these were not his words. He didn't have the language yet, but it was a little bit like, wow, Mom, thanks for the setup. Turns out nobody else in the world knows how to interact this way. You know, essentially he said, I was playing with a ball and another little boy walked up. He said he said, I want the ball. I said, we could play together. I could play first. I could then give it to you. And he hit me, he grabbed the ball and he walked away. Well, that's not very reinforcing. And by the way, if you have teachers that don't reinforce it, if you've got parents that don't reinforce it, if eventually, you go over to college, you certainly aren't going to have, fellow students, especially men in fraternities. You think they're going to talk about how they're feeling. And then pretty soon, you've got a world where this is not only not the norm, but feels uncomfortable because it's just not how we've been socialized.
Yeah. And one aspect of that is what you talked about already, and I agree with you when we think about vulnerability, especially for men. But again, I don't
Yes.
want to generalize, especially in a
Yes.
business context.
Yes.
We often don't like if I think about business leaders, they don't want to show their vulnerability because they think that by doing that they will appear weak.
Yep.
What advice, in addition to what you've shared already, if there is anything else, what advice would you give them?
Well, I want to share another story with you. I think I shared this on Lenny's podcast. But let me give you an example of how this plays out. So in 1975, I went to work for the largest industrial automation company in the world. And I was the first woman hired into a non-clerical job. So it was a long time ago. Dinosaurs weren't roaming the earth, but it was a long time ago. And the first thing I learned very quickly, oh yeah, business, no place for feelings in business. Now I was already kind of a tough girl. I didn't like hanging out with girls. I much preferred boys. There was a reason I ended up being the first woman hired into a non-clerical job at an industrial automation company. And so anyway, leave the feelings in the parking lot. And I got very good at that. And it served me very well. And over 10 years, I got promoted multiple times. Now, I didn't only get promoted because I got very good at never talking about, feelings, but but it was definitely an element. I knew how to play the game with the rules that had been established long before I ever got there. So fast forward 10 years, I'm at an offsite with 6 guys at the time who work for me. I'm now running a $50 million 13 Western state region, sales and marketing. And by the way, for any of you ladies who are on the call, listening, I did finally fix that, but it wasn't the year later. So at the point of this anecdote, I still have 6 men reporting to me. And we have an agenda. It's a 2-day offsite. And I'm really excited about something that I think we could do. And I lead off with, after we review the agenda, I want to talk about this. I think it'd be really cool. I get crickets. So then I get a little more excited. Come on, you guys, this could be really cool. So then I'm like, what is it with you guys? Why can't you see this? And I got a little more agitated. And one of my guys leaned in, Andrea, like this, and he said, Carole, is that water in the corner of your eye? Are you gonna like cry? And then he said, are you human after all? Are you human after all? And then I burst out crying. And I said, you don't think I'm effing human? And I did use the full expletive, but I don't want to offend anybody. It was appropriate for the setting. You don't think I'm effing human? I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that. And I tore up our agenda. And for the next 2 days, we talked about who we were, why we were there. We were vulnerable with each other. And to this day, I know that was the day I became a leader. And I know that was the day we became an unstoppable team. Now, had I burst out crying, the very first month that I was in the job, I would have never ended up where I did. But remember, I talked about appropriate authenticity and appropriate vulnerability. By then, I had more than earned my chops. I didn't have to worry about whether people took me seriously anymore. But now they didn't see me as human. Do you really want to follow somebody who you don't see as human? Are you inspired by somebody who you don't see as human? Are you motivated by somebody you don't see as human? So, when people say there's no place in business for feelings, I'm like, well, how do you motivate without feelings? How do you inspire without feelings? I'm sorry, that's BS. I think we just regrettably get over socialized in certain ways. And then and by the way, we develop mental models, beliefs and assumptions. Oh man, I can never show you that I'm vulnerable because then you'll think I'm weak. Well, one of the things that happens in the course at Stanford and in the Leaders in Tech programs that we do is that CEOs in the Leaders in Tech program or hotshot MBAs at Stanford, they end up in small groups where they discover that the minute they allow themselves to be a little bit more real and seen, everybody else feels not only more connected to them, but more likely to follow them. The question I always ask my students, and I now ask my participants, is why should somebody follow you? Not why does somebody did somebody follow Steve Jobs or does somebody follow Oprah? Why should somebody follow you? And that's a pretty profound question to sit in for a year, which is what happens at Leaders in Tech, and for a quarter, which is 2 quarters, which is what happens at Stanford. And part of what emerges is, well, why would you take me fully seriously if you couldn't relate to me as a fellow human being?
And as you asked the question, I started thinking about what that means for me. But of course, it will take much more than just a few minutes for me to have my
Yeah.
answer. It could take a year, very well, yeah.
Hey,
And
it takes some people a lifetime.
exactly. And now, conflict. You talked about you gave me the example of your 2 kids. She wanted to have the opportunity to pick the
Choose.
game. So there was maybe a bit of conflict at the beginning. Now, in your book, you explain that conflict is often seen as bad, as a negative thing for relationships. And by the way, that resonated with me so much because I tend to see, if I think about my conflict with my wife, for example. For me, conflict is bad. I tend to
Yes.
avoid it all the time at all costs. But you say that conflict can be used to or can strengthen relationships.
Yes.
Tell me more.
So let's go back to language creates reality, and let's look at the word conflict. What if we used language like disagreement with emotion? Does that feel a little different than conflict? Because you got a lot of things associated with the word conflict. You've got bad things that have occurred in the past associated with conflict. So that's one just a little thing to think about. But let's go back to how conflict can actually build stronger relationships. Let's first of all, David and I had an incredible conflict, probably maybe the biggest conflict of my whole life. If we believe in our power to repair, and we are really committed to each other and to our relationship, we can repair, then not only is conflict less scary, it's like, I know we can repair it, but on the other side of it is a stronger relationship that the metaphor, we talk about kintsugi, which is the Japanese art form of taking broken pottery and putting the pieces back together with gold, like gold filament glue, so that you highlight the breaks and the pot's even more beautiful. So that's one way to think about what's on the other side of conflict. Because you know what happens when you have a really significant conflict? You learn a whole lot about each other. I learned a lot about David I didn't know, and he learned a lot about me. And we'd been colleagues and friends and very close for 15 years. And man, did we discover stuff we didn't know. And we would have never been able to co-author a book had we not been through the conflict. Because one of the things that happened in the conflict was I came to understand that I made myself smaller. You know, David was the big, you know, the professor, the guy who invented Touchy Feely, you know, my mentor. And I always felt one level a little down. And that impacted a lot of the choices I made. And I always wanted his approval, and, you know, and then after the conflict, it was like, no, you know what? We are equals. We both have our strengths. We both have our weaknesses. We both bring complementary things to the party. And that's why we were able to write a book together.
Beautiful, beautiful story. And also, Carole, I wanted to ask you now, so far, I've been thinking about your ideas at a personal level, like one,
Yes.
it could be me or maybe like one individual. Is there something to say about how to create an environment, if we think about organizations, businesses, an
Yeah.
environment that encourages the kind of open and authentic communication, or maybe the kind of vulnerability that you talk, or all
Yeah.
the other tools that you talk about in the book?
Yeah. Well, of course, I mean, the essence of the work is interpersonal, which by definition is going to be between two people. And this course is embedded in the leadership curriculum at Stanford Business School. It's not hidden away in some psychology department. It's part of the leadership curriculum. And you know, my startup, Leaders of Tech, it's all about how to be a more effective leader, which by definition means it's not just how you're going to interact with people one-on-one, it's what's the culture you're going to build. And how is that going to be correlated with higher performance? So let's start with the fact that leaders are role models. So the more you role model any of this, first of all, the more you normalize it. And second of all, the more people aspire to do more of that too. Second of all, leaders invest in having their people learn these skills. We have, CEOs, founders who've hired us to train their entire company on these skills. And part of people's performance evaluation is, are you using the skills? So I mean, there's lots of ways to what's the right word I'm looking? The only word that comes to mind for me is make it part of the DNA of your team or your organization. Now, if you're only trying to do it with your team and you're embedded in a larger organization where everybody else thinks that's all BS, it's harder, because then it's only among you on the team. And then anytime you're interacting with somebody outside it, that's harder. In fact, years ago, David and I actually did a piece of work for a president of a very large conglomerate who had been through an executive training program with us, who said, oh my God, I want to bring this to my whole company. And we did this, and there were like a couple hundred people. But then what happened was that the chairman of the large conglomerate thought this was all BS. And none of the other presidents or none of the other general managers, had this, until suddenly some of the other general managers started noticing that in this division, there was a lot less turnover. They had a lot easier time attracting great candidates. Whenever anybody from another division talked to people there, they were like, oh my God, this is the best place I've ever worked. They started asking themselves, what's going on over there? People do business with people. And then a few others hired us. And you know what? The chairman never became convinced, never bought it.
For him, or for her, I guess for him, it was a little bit too touchy-feely.
Absolutely.
But going back to the course, Touchy Feely Interpersonal Dynamics at Stanford, as you said, the most popular, oversubscribed course at the business school. Now, one thing I liked and I like about that course, if I understood it correctly, is that there was, I think you used to put your students into groups. I think you
Small
called them
groups.
T groups.
T groups, right.
T groups, which were sort of labs for them to be able to put everything into practice. And that resonated a lot with me, because, for example, if I think about what we do in a company, we in our own world, presenting, public speaking, we train people, groups of people. So we've got groups as well. And for us, it's like public speaking is a very practical skill. So learning how to help our clients, our students, put everything into practice is super important. Tell me more about how you went about helping your students put everything into practice with these T groups.
Well, it's the same. It's a variation on what we just talked about with regard to what you do, what a leader does in their company. So a T group, by the way, the T stands for training, not therapy. And T groups were actually invented at a place called the NTL Labs a long time ago as a modality as a pedagogy, which is you put 12 strangers, ideally 12 strangers in a room, and they learn about what's effective interpersonally by interacting with each other. So, you and I have a conversation, and I say something, and that kind of bothers you, and you say, I don't know, I felt a little put off by that. And then somebody else says, well, I think you're being overly sensitive. And then somebody else has a reaction to them. And then pretty soon your lab has come to life. And so that's how they learn the very practical, they put the skills to use immediately with each other. They're not learning by listening to me lecture or reading about it in a book. They're interacting with each other. And that's why it's so powerful. Same thing happens at Leaders in Tech. 12 CEOs are sitting around, and one of them finds out that they have a habit of doing something that nobody has ever told them. And then they get to learn that when they first responded with, that's your problem, that did not make anybody want to tell them more. That just made it harder for anybody to want to say anything. So, you know, the practical application part of it happens as part of the pedagogy. Now, then there is what I do and we call that, you know, the real world, actually. And then people say, what do I do in the default world? And then, of course, we have all kinds of, we have coaches, we have people that, we have small offerings we do for like teams, but we don't put teams in a T group. Because a laboratory, and this might resonate for you, because by definition, organizations are not laboratories. They're not places for experimenting. They're places for executing. So you got to experiment in a place that feels really safe, where there are no power differentials, where everybody is on the same page about the goal being learning. And then you get to figure out. So you've learned how to give feedback using the concept of the net and the three, and you've done it several times in real time with people. Now you get to go outside. You can still use the model, but now you've had a lot of opportunity to try it, which is, by the way, why in the book, you might remember at the end of every chapter, there's a deepen your learning. Go do this with somebody. And because that's really how you learn.
Yeah, by doing. And Carole, do you have any personal habits or practices that either at the moment or maybe in the past that have improved your own interpersonal relationships?
The biggest one is a mindfulness practice, because the more aware I am of what's going on for me, and the more in tune I am with what might be going on for you. In the book, we talk about it as two antennas, an antenna that picks up internal signals, an external antenna that picks up what's going on for you. The more I can have both those antennas picking up even the subtlest of signals, the more informed the choices I can make about how we interact with each other. And in fact, I used to think the course could have been called Interpersonal Mindfulness, because that's a lot of what we're doing is we're making you aware and then creating conditions where you are constantly reminded of things that normally you just don't even pay attention to.
When you say mindfulness practice, are you referring to meditation, for
Yes.
example? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
understood.
meditate. Well, now that I have long COVID, I meditate probably 2 to 3 hours a day.
Wow.
But before long COVID, I meditated at least a half an hour to 45 minutes a day.
2 to 3 hours a day of meditation. Wow, interesting.
I would not have the capacity to even do some work. I mean, I've had to cut my work way back, but I wouldn't have the capacity to do any work if I did not have the mindfulness practice that I have. And by the way, I am so grateful that I already had it before I got sick, because I don't know if I would have developed it, but at least I had it, and all I had to do was say, wow, you know, when I meditate for half an hour, I come out of that meditation, I am in a much more serene place.
So I don't know, like, for example, for me, I tried that years ago, although I used to do, I think it was something like 10, 15 minutes in the morning, 10, 15 minutes before going to bed, not 2, 3 hours. And although I enjoyed it, it was a good thing. I liked it. I don't know why, but somehow I stopped doing it. For me, my meditate, I like to think of it as my meditation, although perhaps it has nothing to do with it, is reading. I have a daily reading practice. Every morning is the first thing I do,
Right.
and I call it my meditation. But
My husband plays classical piano hour and a half, couple hours a day. That for him, that's what he calls his. And I mean, it's a flow experience, right? Puts him in flow. That's a little different than meditation, where the focus of meditation is to become aware from moment to moment of whatever is bubbling up in the field of awareness. And I was really lucky to have found my way into a Jon Kabat-Zinn retreat. I don't know if you've heard of Jon Kabat-Zinn. He's a very quite famous. He created a program called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And he was one of the people who first at a hospital, I think Massachusetts General, someplace like that. And his work has led to mindfulness being much more mainstreamed. Doctors recommend it all the time now, right? Because there are physical changes in your brain that happen when you're meditating. And you might have read a lot about brain plasticity. Well, the fellow we were talking about before, brain plasticity. Well, meditation unquestionably makes your brain more neuroplastic.
My wife she often talks about brain plasticity because she is a coach and trainer for parents who have children with special educational needs, autism
Yes,
in particular. So
yes.
she often talks about brain
Oh yeah,
plasticity. I'm familiar with the
yeah.
concept.
I
And
could see where that would be super helpful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Carole, in terms of books, now, in addition to your own book, which of course I recommend, a fantastic book, we are going to include the link in the show notes. If you think about what we talked about today, building exceptional relationships, or at the very least, strong, robust, functional relationships, are there any other books that come to mind that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
Well, if you're interested in learning more about a way to apply some of this in a business setting, I recommend two of David's books. One is called Power Up, and transforming leadership through I don't know, something about shared leadership. I don't remember the full title, but it's called Power Up by David Bradford and his co-author. The other one is called Influence Without Authority. And also an excellent read on how do you, I mean, from a business standpoint, people do business with people. Why are we building these relationships? So that we can influence each other more effectively and together make something happen that we both care about. So those are two books that I think are quite good. One of the reasons that David and I wrote the book we did was that we didn't see a book like this out there. That there are books on feedback, there are books on self-awareness, there are books on conflict resolution, there are books, but we just did not see anything anywhere like this. And in fact, it was the reason Penguin Random House approached us to write the book, because they were like, so you've got this, this course that's this for 40 years the most popular course, and there's no book. And they said, why is there no book? We said, because you don't learn about this by reading about it. You actually have to do it. And they were like, well, so the only people who are going to be lucky enough to learn this are those that are lucky enough and privileged enough to go to Stanford. And we were like, okay, we'll write a book. That's why we spent so many years writing the application piece at the end.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
perfect. Thank you very much. And I'm also going to include the two books that you mentioned in addition to Connect. And if anybody wants to connect with you and learn more about the book and your work and what you do, where
so
should they go?
I
Where do they
recommend
find you?
two things. One is feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And by the way, I've got one of those accounts where you can't connect with me unless you've got my email address. Feel free to put my email address in the show notes. But please, for all of you listeners, if you're trying to sell me something, please do not connect with me for that purpose. If you're interested in connecting with me to follow my work or to ask me about my work, great. That's the reason it's set up that way, because man, was I getting 17 offers for things. The other really great way to learn more is to go to our book website, connectandrelate.com, www.connectandrelate.com. There, not only will you find lots of articles and many other podcasts, but you'll also find 2 free downloadable resources. One is a self-assessment that you can download, take it, give it to people in your life, compare how you see yourself to how they see you, and see whether or not there are areas you might want to work on. Gee, I thought I was a really good listener. Look at this. 4 people wrote that, told me I was a terrible listener. And the other free downloadable resource is create your own learning group. So it takes you step by step, get 4 or 5 people together, get a couple of books that you can share, or each person get a book, and then actually take yourself through the book using the guide that we've created. And there's also a link to my newly launched Carole Robin AI.
Ah,
So, you're going into a meeting and you're like, I wonder what Carole Robin would say about how I should handle the fact that I'm so mad at so-and-so. Ask Carole Robin AI. I just had a big fight with my kid. I have no idea where to go next. Ask Carole Robin AI.
very interesting. I'm definitely going to use that one and also the self-assessment
Yeah.
after this
I
call.
will tell you one thing about Carole Robin AI. The irony of creating an AI to help people learn how to connect with each other is not lost on me. But it is 100 languages. You can ask it 100 languages.
Amazing. Amazing. And one final question, Carole.
Yes.
Have I missed something? Again, if you think about this topic, your area of expertise, your book, is there something that I missed, a question that you were hoping for me to ask and I missed it, I haven't done it? Anything else to add?
Oh, what a good question. I thought you did a really good job of giving me an opportunity about talking about everything that I hold near and dear to my heart. You didn't ask me, and I don't have a need to get into how did I get into this, because this is my life's work, but I've had 6 different careers. I was in sales and marketing, and I was in recruiting, and I did a lot of things. And I was in consulting. I had my own I was a partner in a consulting firm. But I believe I was put on this planet to help people learn how to connect with each other and lead more meaningful lives by connecting with each other. And I didn't realize that until I fortuitously landed at Stanford Business School and was given an opportunity to teach this class. So it is my life's work, and I believe with every cell of my body, and we could close here, that if we had a critical mass of human beings on this planet equipped with these skills and competencies, we wouldn't just have better organizations and more functional teams. We'd have stronger families. We'd have stronger communities. We'd have more robust nonprofits. And by the way, sometimes when I dream big, maybe more functional governments. So both my life's work and some of my most disappointing moments in my life have been, how do I get a critical mass of people equipped? Not even, I don't care about making any money. I care about equipping a critical mass of people. I don't know how to get there anymore.
I'm glad I asked the question because that was a perfect way to end this conversation. Carole, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, for sharing your ideas, your insights, and
Thank you.
let's keep in touch.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.